I'm live. It's Saturday the 15th of April 2023, and I'm reading out of Joan Grant's far memory book, So Moses Was Born. This plays in the time of old Egypt. The pharaoh Sati has died, Moses is his heir. This story is written from the view of Nebunefer, who is Moses' older brother, the original heir to the flail and crook, but he gave up this job, and Moses takes over, and Nebunefer retires to the living water, which is a remote estate. He lives there in seclusion for 25 years, and then he's called back to the court of his brother. So this was half the chapter entitled Fugitive, and I continue. Evening shadows were beginning to flow down into the bowl of cultivation before I saw Sensen leave the house. She walked slowly down the avenue. Even in the distance I knew she was forlorn, that I was angry. When she reached the lake, she took off her sandals and sat on the wall, dabbling her feet in the water. She wore a blue dress, and a wreath of white flowers held back her hair. No doubt the Lady Erie would be wearing some of Pharaoh's more lavish gifts, in case we had heard that she came from a barge. What role would she play? The innocent child sorely misjudged, or would I be expected to prove that I was more difficult to please than Moses? At least I need not behave like a sulky boy, afraid to return home because he has offended his elders. I made my way back to the path and descended it briskly, wishing as though Erie's arrival was a matter too trivial to concern me. Without fully intending to do so, I found myself hurrying to join Sensen. "I'm so glad you've come back," she said. "I thought you were cross. You aren't cross, are you?" I was, but I'm not any longer. She can't do us any harm. We won't let her. Dear silly Neb, I'm not Nefertari, and there is no Tua here. Unless Tua is disguised, I said, and stamped on a scorpion that darted from a crevice in the rock. Sensen shivered. Though the evening was warm, "I didn't see it," she said. "If you hadn't come, it might have stung me." We heard the dry patter of hoofs echoing down the tunnel. Sensen slipped her hand in mine. "If she pretends to be grand, you mustn't be angry with her. She will only be trying to behave like a lady of the court." Hebo was leading a donkey which carried the Lady Erie. She wore a yellow cloak, and over her head was a fall of blue linen that shielded her bandaged eyes. "Welcome to the living water," I said, and the stilted words made me feel foolish. The girl put her hand out, groping towards us. "Shall I untie your bandage?" said Sensen. "You must forgive Hebo for bringing you here blindfolded. Later we will explain why he thought it necessary." "You're very kind," she said. "I've heard so much about you from Kia, otherwise I should not have dared to intrude upon you." Kia came from the tunnel and whispered urgently to Sensen. I caught only the word bandage and could not understand why Sensen went suddenly pale. "You must be tired, Erie," she said gently. "We shall soon be at the house." She took the donkey's head rope from Hebo and led the way down the path to the avenue. Kia plucked at my tunic to prevent me from following them. "The Lady Erie must not take off the bandage, for something is wrong with her eyes. She's very brave, but the light sears like fire, and I think she will soon be blind." Hebo had brought me a letter from Pharaoh. The writings were carelessly formed, so I knew it was not the work of a scribe, but of Moses himself. I still have it, so I will give you a faithful copy, omitting only the preliminary inquiry as to our health and well-being. "Erie tells me that you will have already heard from Hebo how she came to live in our house at Thebes, and later became one of the queen's women. I ask you and Sensen to cherish her for the sake of your brother, who is pharaoh of the two lands, yet cannot himself protect the girl who has afforded him a refuge in her heart. When you gave me the crook and flail, you said that my enemies were already divided against each other by jealousy. Tua is more subtle than I feared, for she has used jealousy to divide me from my friends. If this were all, I should not be forced to appeal to your charity, nor to disturb your peace. One of my first acts as Pharaoh was to visit Abydos, where I found our father's mortuary temple to be still unfinished, and all the works he had ordered, including the temple of Za'atet, grossly neglected. Karadin warned me not to make pertinent inquiries regarding the misappropriation of the revenues, but I was determined to assert my authority. The guilt lay with Usamentu, who, as you know, only too well was privy to my mother's plot to murder you. I took considerable pleasure in informing him that instead of the increased tribute which he was demanding, he would be held responsible for the completion within a year of the new temples at Abydos. I was proud to have made him my enemy. Usamentu still exerts so great an influence with the whole priesthood of Amen that I dare not have him either exiled or otherwise rendered harmless. In fact, I doubt whether death would do more than increase the venom of this particular scorpion, if that death were hastened by mortal hands. On Karadin's advice, I placated the priesthood by commencing several new temples, which, when completed, should prove more enduring than anything yet built, with the possible exception of the greater pyramids. It is solemn evidence of the influence of Atman that even Karadin encourages me to burden the treasury with enormous extra expenditure. Usamentu, however, is still fully aware that I distrust him, and that I wait impatiently for the time when I need no longer be influenced by him or his kind. He also knows that my increasing popularity with the common people is due to Eri having helped me to understand some of the problems which affect their daily lives. For instance, the tax on salt, wool and barley has been decreased by a fifth part, and the market tax of a tenth has been rescinded to the benefit of thousands of the poor and the annoyance of the temples who counted these as part of their revenue. Nefertari approves my reforms, though recently she has been less interested in matters which do not personally affect her. The physicians tell me that this attitude of mine is natural to her condition, though I'd hoped that she would prove a notable exception in the great tradition of women such as Hatshepsut and Nefertiti. No doubt this appointment will become more acceptable when I'm older in years. I already feel far too old in heart. I've almost forgotten the joy of sailing a boat, and instead of know only the river, when a rhythm of rowers punctuates the interminable speeches I deliver to the crowds assembled to watch the progress. Usamentu, possibly at my mother's instigation, told me 5 months ago that Eri was in the power of Sekhmet, and that her presence in the palace would prove a malign influence on my unborn child. He spoke of this after a particularly long and tiresome audience, so I answered him without the modium of tact, which lately I have used to temper my more forthright statements. Somewhat bluntly, I told him that if he could not protect us from the dark gods without trying to foist the blame of his inadequacy on an innocent child of 13, I should be forced to believe the allegations which suggested that most of the priesthood were growing fat and lazy, and that their cure would be effected only by healthful fasting. This did not please him. 3 months later he returned to the attack, pretending that Ptah had appeared to him in person, to say that as Eri persisted in looking to the dark moon for power, he had reluctantly decided that I must be given proof, and that Eri would slowly become blind. When Nefertari complained that Eri was increasingly clumsy, you can imagine my dismay. At first Eri refused to admit that her vision was blurred, but I forced the truth from her, though I did not tell her that my alarm was due to more than pity for her affliction. Of one thing I'm sure, Eri is entirely innocent, and her blindness is not due to the intervention of Ptah. Is she suffering only from one of the eye infections, which are unfortunately only too common in Egypt? My personal physician, an excellent man who cured Eri of the sores on her leg, says that the symptoms are unusual in a girl of her age. The progress of the disease is slow but relentless. Her eyelids are no longer inflamed, though strong light causes her acute pain, which neither ointment, lotions, nor magical healing appear to relieve. Is her affliction due to some subtle poison, either in her food or introduced as dust into her room? I suspected Tua's hand in this, but she seemed genuinely frightened that the girl is a source of danger to the household. I have given much anxious thought to these two alternatives and have reluctantly rejected both and come to believe that she is under a curse put on her by Usamentu, or one of his priests. Undoubtedly some of the Amen priests have the power they claim and are not scrupulous in using it in ways which are utterly at variance with the traditions our father upheld. You may well ask why I do not attempt her cure by getting some beneficent priest to break the curse and then to heal the damage already caused, if indeed her release did not produce a spontaneous recovery of sight. But how can I find such a priest? I cannot. That is the stark truth of the situation in which I find myself. I am determined that my successor must be himself a fully initiated, a winged pharaoh. There is no other way in which Pharaoh can rule without being subservient to Amen, unless he becomes a tyrant who denies his people their rightful intermediaries with the gods. Nefertari's child will be born within a few days. She is convinced that it is a son, but my concern is only if he, one whose jar of the Ma'at is already so clear that he can become initiate before I appoint him my royal heir. Having confessed myself helpless to protect Eri, you may well ask why I should inflict her upon you. Perhaps there's one thing which you do not know about living water. Why did Seti build a temple there? No temple there. He told me the reason when we were with him at Abydos 4 years ago, though at the time I did not know the place to which he referred. He said that every man, especially those of royal and therefore semi-divine blood, should have somewhere in which he sought personal awareness of the gods. He advised me, I remember, to look up to the sky when I was alone, or to seek some hidden place in the reeds where I could find that solitude in which I might feel myself truly in company. I asked him where he went to be alone with the gods, and he smiled and said he made such a place for your mother. He called it the living water as a symbol of the spring that gushes from the jar of the Ma'at to bring the flowers of rejoicing to the arid heart. I did not then realize that he had found actual underground springs to bring fertility to some remote desert valley. Because he intended to build no temples there, he asked a certain priest whom he greatly honored to make the whole area of the living water into sanctuary. I could protect Eri with walls 70 cubits high and 40 cubits thick. I could set 5,000 men to guard the gates, and still Usamenti would mock my pitiful defenses. But no priest of Amen, unless he be of the merciful gods, can prevail against her while she is in the sanctuary that was given to you and Sensen by our father. Excuse me. I shall now stop here. Second part of The Fugitive.